I am continuing in my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am continuing reading in a chronological order, according to event, not according to publication or volume, so I'm skipping around a bit as I move along. We are continuing in the Gospels. We are in the final week of Christ's mortal life. We've been reading about the time of the Last Supper. It was briefly covered in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where they talked about the actual meal and the institution of the sacrament. We then read in John the institution of the washing of feet and a few last instructions of John to his 11 apostles, as Judas Iscariot had already left to join up with the Pharisees. The last thing we read was his great intercessory prayer. And now we will be moving to the Garden of Gethsemane. We're going to be reading this in 3 videos. Our first video here will be in Matthew. Then we will read in Mark, and our third video will be both Luke and John. In this video, we have a Joseph Smith translation. Now, what the Joseph Smith translation is, this is a translation or correction done by Joseph Smith to restore those passages that have been lost or corrupted over the years. So Matthew chapter 26, verses 36 through 56. Then cometh Jesus with them unto a place called Gethsemane, and saith unto the disciples, Sit ye here, while I go and pray yonder. And he took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, and began to be sorrowful and very heavy. Then saith he unto them, My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even unto death. Tarry ye here, and watch with me. And he went a little further, and fell on his face, and prayed, saying, O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. And he cometh unto the disciples, and findeth them asleep, and saith unto Peter, What? Could ye not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. He went away again the second time, and prayed, saying, O my Father, if this cup may not pass away from me, except I drink it, thy will be done. And he came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. And he left them and went away again, and prayed the third time, saying the same words. Then cometh he to his disciples, and saith unto them, Sleep on now, and take your rest. Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. Behold, he is at hand that doth betray me. 3 times he goes and prays, and you can feel it in his words that he really doesn't want to suffer this much. I honestly don't think Christ understood just how much he was going to suffer, just how painful this was going to be. We can't comprehend it. There's no way for us to even think about what Christ went through. He suffered everything for us. Physical, emotional, spiritual, mental, all pains were suffered by Christ in the garden. And I think we have it these 3 times because he couldn't do it all at once. He went in, he prayed, he started to take on the sins of the world and the suffering of the world. And he had to pause and go back. And then he came back and he did it again, took some more of it on him. And after the 3rd time, he had done all. He had taken everything on him. And his suffering didn't stop there. He had just now had this burden placed on him. This weight of sin and suffering for the entire world was now on his shoulders. And I think that's part of the way he came back to his disciples, kind of like, let me go back and see my friends again before I have to continue this. And he found them sleeping. And I don't think he was necessarily disappointed. I think he understood that they were tired. But it was more, rather than being disappointed that they didn't stay up, I think he was disappointed that he didn't have anybody to kind of talk to for a moment there before he went back and took it on him again. Now also note that the 11 go with him into Gethsemane. But 8 of them stay in one place, and then Peter, James, and John, because James and John are the sons of Zebedee, the 3 of them, the presidency, go a little farther with him by themselves, and at that point he says, okay, now the time has come, I've got to go on my own. And then he goes a little further. But the 3 have that little extra blessing of being with, that little extra honor of being with Christ alone. Now, I do find it interesting, when he first comes back the 3rd time, he says, sleep on. And then in the very next verse, he says, arise. I think if we say, he said, could you not watch with me 1 hour? So each time he went was probably 1 hour. So it was about 3 hours. I probably waited another hour before he said, arise, the one that betrays me is coming. Now, the feast would have happened early on in the evening, after the sun went down, but probably before midnight. It would have been around, 10, maybe 11 o'clock. And that would have continued for a number of hours, probably to 1 or maybe even 2 in the morning, because he talked to them a lot. They did a lot of things during that time. So 4 hours after 1 is when he says to arise, the one that betrays me is coming. It'll be about 5 o'clock in the morning. That's the feeling I'm getting anyways. It may tell us differently, but that's what I'm getting. And sunrise would have been about 6. So maybe I'm off. Maybe it would have been like midnight. Now it's about 4 o'clock that he gets arrested at about 4. That might make more sense, but let's see. Pick it up in verse 47. And while he yet spake, lo, Judas, one of the 12, came, and with him a great multitude with swords and staves from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now he that betrayed him gave them a sign, saying, Whomsoever I shall kiss, that same is he, hold him fast. And forthwith he came to Jesus, and said, Hail, Master, and kissed him. And Jesus said unto him, Friend, wherefore art thou come? Then came they, and laid hands on Jesus, and took him. And behold, one of them which were with Jesus stretched out his hand, and drew his sword, and struck a servant of the high priest, and smote off his ear. Then said Jesus unto him, Put up again thy sword into his place. For all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Thinkest thou that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then shall the scriptures be fulfilled, that thus it must be? In that same hour said Jesus to the multitudes, Are ye come out as against a thief with swords and staves for to take me? I sat daily with you, teaching in the temple, and ye laid no hold on me. But all this was done, that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples forsook him and fled. Now, we do know it was Peter that struck off the servant's ear. I think it's in Mark that it states that directly. Might be in John as well. But Judas comes, and it's odd. He has to give him the sign, but Christ had been teaching publicly in the temple. Apparently, see, none of the actual high priests or Pharisees are here. They're sending their guard under the command of Judas. He's coming out there leading these men. These men may not have been familiar with Christ. And that's why he gives these men the sign. The high priest would have known Christ, but these soldiers might not have. And then, Christ, he says, when Peter cuts off the guy's ear, he says, Stop. Do you think I couldn't call down legions? Now remember, Christ, by the power of his word, cursed and basically killed a fig tree. Christ has proven that he has power, not just to heal, but to kill, to destroy. And he's telling him here, look, I'm going because this is what has to happen. And then I love that he tells the multitude, I could have been arrested at any time while I was preaching daily, publicly in the temple, but you're coming after me now because this is in fulfillment of prophecy. Anyways, we will now look at the Joseph Smith translation. Okay, just some simple stuff. In verse 36, saith is changed to said. Verse 38, saith is corrected to said. In verse 40, saith is corrected to said. And in all of these, there's that second manuscript where the possibility of ye being corrected to you. Now also in verse 40, it's now findeth them asleep, and he said, rather than just and saith unto Peter. It's and he said. In verse 41, watch and pray that you enter not into temptation. He said unto them, the spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak. Again, in 45, saith is changed to said. And instead of take rest, it's take your rest. But we have this alternate one here too, where it's and take your rest, and they did so. And when they awoke, Jesus saith unto them, behold, the hour is at hand. So that gives, remember, I mentioned that it was a little odd, that it was, he says, take your rest, and then immediately arise, the traitor's coming. That gives us a transition there. They go to sleep, and when they wake up, Christ says, okay, now it's time. I like that. In verse 46, it now reads, and after they had slept, he said unto them, arise, and let us be going. So this is the other possible translation to give us a transition between the two. Interesting. It is interesting. In verse 47, we have, now it's, and while he yet spake, behold, Judas, instead of lo, Judas. And then later on, with swords and staves, having authority from the chief priests. In verse 50, we now have, and Jesus said unto him, Judas, wherefore art thou come to betray me with a kiss? verse 51. Now there is also an alternate here to verse 50, and I like this one. It says here, "And Jesus said unto him, Judas, betrayest thou the Son of Man with a kiss? And Jesus also said unto the captain, Friend, wherefore art thou come? And then they came and laid hands on Jesus and took him." So he calls out Judas for his betrayal, and then he asks the captain of the guard, "Why are you here?" It's almost as if the captain of the guard was a disciple, somebody that Christ had maybe talked to. It's interesting. In verse 51 we have, "And behold, one of them who was with Jesus drew his sword and stretched out his hand and struck a servant of the high priest." In verse 52 says, "Put up thy sword into its place," instead of his, "and for all they who take the sword." Verse 54 now reads, "But how then shall the scriptures be fulfilled that thus it must be? And he put forth his hand and touched the servant's ear, and it was healed." Then we have verse 55. "To" is corrected to "unto," and instead of teaching in the temple, it is "with you in the temple teaching." And that's it. Now, see, in here it mentions Christ healing the man who had his ear cut off. We don't read that in the King James of Matthew. That is in other Gospels. So we're going to leave that here. We pick this up in Mark next, so I will see you there.